In his biography of Tennessee Williams, Donald Spoto describes the kind of Christianity to which the playwright was exposed while growing up in Mississippi with his grandfather, who was an Episcopal priest. Jesus was a refuge and a healer. Dogma was minimized and comfort maximized. Religion was not so much a challenge as a caress. It was a nice thing for nice people, but it had its place and was not permitted too wide a field of activity. When I read those words, they set me to thinking. By and large, they apply to people like you and me. We see Jesus as a refuge and a healer for our individual ills. Religion is not so much a challenge as it is a caress, a nice thing for nice people that has its place, yet should not be permitted too wide an area of activity. But I'll tell you something. That's not totally bad. It isn't. That's not totally bad. After all, even under the best of circumstances, life can be difficult. We have inner and outer struggles which are pain-filled, struggles that are common to all humanity. And we have lots of challenges, and they come to us whether we like it or not. So what's wrong with seeing Jesus as a refuge and a healer of our individual ills? What's wrong with embracing a religion that caresses? Nothing. Unless that's all there is to it. Theologian Reinhold Niebuhr recognized the dangers of this one-sidedness when he famously said, "Authentic religion should always comfort the afflicted, but it should also afflict the comfortable." And the fact is, if taken seriously, Jesus does just that. Yet because of our many hurts, we usually refuse to recognize the second part of the equation. That refusal tends to make our Jesus an ineffectual sentimentalist who does not have much to do with the real world. A serious mistake. A Jesus that does not have much to do with the real world. He's a nice thing for nice people, undergirding our personal and political biases, a caress rather than a challenge, and it's all very understandable. But the truth is, that Jesus is only a pale reflection of the real person. That's why it's always appropriate to scrutinize our faith journey and reflect more broadly on the Jesus we praise. And I would like us to do that this morning for just a few minutes. But I caution you, as I caution myself, beware. Beware. For Jesus not only comforts the afflicted, but afflicts the comfortable. So let's begin our little exercise. Any serious look at Jesus reminds us that there is something about him that offends everyone. That's true. There's something about him that offends everyone. He's not just the comforting, brown-haired, blue-eyed person depicted by the artist Salmon, whose painting of Jesus' head is probably in every Protestant church in the USA, and it's even in our church. Moreover, Jesus is not the eccentric mystic in bleached white robes usually promoted by Hollywood. Listen to how John Dominic Crossan, one of the premier New Testament scholars of our day, has to say about all of this. Jesus had both a religious dream and a social program, and it was that conjunction that got him killed. The Roman Empire may have regularly abused its power, but it seldom wasted it. It did not crucify teachers or philosophers. It usually just exiled them permanently or cleared them out of Rome periodically. Indeed, if Jesus had been only a matter of words or ideas, the Romans would have probably ignored him, and we would probably not be talking about him today. His kingdom movement was action and practice, not just thought and theory. How true. This one we praise talks about loving God, which offends humanists because they have difficulty handling mystery, and they think the highest thing or the summum bonum of life can be measured by human beings. This one we praise speaks about loving God with the mind, and that offends the anti-intellectuals because they think serious reflection is a waste of time. He mentions loving God with the heart. That offends the person who's afraid of his emotions, his feelings, and hides behind legalisms and rigid rationalities. He confronts the powers that be and how they continually oppress the people at large. Most of the people in Jesus' day were peasants, and Jesus himself was a Mediterranean peasant, just barely able to eke out a living. Jesus emphasizes loving God with our deeds. That upsets those who want to greedily pursue their self-interest without regard to the effect that might have on others. He speaks about how God often values most what we value least: the humble, the peacemakers, those who aren't devious. When Jesus came into the world, he brought with him that prophetic vision of God, and he lived it. And he called others to do the same. And he brought something else, a continual challenge to find deeper, more humane ways to relate to others and to society. Make sure you heard that last point, and to society. Not just to individuals, but to society. We often forget that as evidence of our amnesia. I ask you to look at some of the so-called religious programs on the TV channel. Oh, you can find them there. Turn on Channel 40. Watch them. Only don't do it too long. It'll pollute your mind. It will. Don't do it too long, but watch them. Watch them. Listen. Listen. Or go to a bookstore, Barnes and Noble, or any other popular bookstore, and look on the religious shelf and see what kind of books that are there under the label Christianity or religion. How is Jesus presented in those venues? As an angry chauvinist who wants to retreat into the promise of a moral society defined in narrow terms? Or as a king of mind cure? Or a kind of miracle worker who will make us healthy, happy, and more financially successful? But is that the Jesus of the gospel? Is it? Look again. Look again. Like the people in his day, there are many in ours who say, Jesus, show us a sign when your kingdom will arrive so I can be saved. But the gospel is clear. In Jesus' vision and program, the kingdom is always available. It's a permanent possibility to be embraced now. Go beyond the law, forgive 70 times 7. That is a radical question, meaning don't ever cut off mercy and generosity. Always make that part of your life. Don't cut that off. The gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. That is, give up normalcy or business as usual for the kingdom or the renewal of justice in your society. Give without return. Opt out of the exploitation domination system like the Roman Empire and the Herodians, Herod Antipas, the puppet king of Rome that oppressed the people. Give up on that and try something else. Turn the other cheek. Don't let people stomp you into the ground, but summon your nerve to try a path that's never been considered, like meeting violence sometimes with nonviolence, nonviolent action. Do something different to try and break the chain of hate. Over and over again, Jesus challenges us to find deeper, more humane ways to relate to others and to relate to all of society. Over and over again, he challenges us to rejoice in our differences and celebrate our diversity. And that's why a core belief of the Christian faith is a love that's inclusive. Inclusive, not exclusive. Inclusive, regardless of your sexual orientation or your color or your background. He talks about that, and that's why one of the chief symbols of living in the realm where God's ways hold complete sway are like having a great feast. A great feast where no one is a stranger. Without question, these challenges disturb and they upset. But they have to do with real life, or they have to do with salvation, salvas, wholeness, unlike so much of society's conventional wisdom, which makes that promise, but it delivers the opposite. So beware. Beware of what you praise. From Jesus, we learn that relating to others individually and collectively isn't simple. it takes courage, and it takes effort. Not sentiment and cliches. It takes deeds, not feelings. And that's a challenge and not a caress. I'll mention one other troubling dimension about Jesus. He's always associated with a cross. He's always associated with a cross. Today the cross is by and large ornamental. It functions as a kind of billboard for the church to give its central place of worship more visibility from the street. In many cases, it's a trinket we can purchase to wear as a necklace or a bracelet or earrings or a lapel pin. Some clergy, and yes, I've seen this, even have a decal that they can put on their bumper that has a cross on it, so you can get a special parking place in certain settings. Church architects are interested in designing crosses that fit in with the decor of the sanctuary. Now, I'm not on a crusade against the uses of the cross, but a cross has another dimension. It has another dimension. It is the prelude, the necessary ingredient to resurrection or creative transformation. It is the prelude to that. The prelude to it. And what do I mean by that? Listen to William Willimon, who was a former chaplain at Duke University, a United Methodist, and recently a United Methodist bishop who is about to retire. Anyway, Willimon said, several years ago I taught a course for a congregation in Mississippi. And I asked that group of ordinary, everyday lay people in this ordinary church the following question. Has anyone here had to die in order to be a Christian? There was silence. Then after a while, they began to testify. One elderly lady said, I thought I couldn't live in a world where black people were considered the same as white people. When segregation was outlawed, I thought I would die. But I didn't. In fact, I was kind of reborn. My next door neighbor, who happens to be black, became a friend. Something old had to die in me for something new to be born. And so it is. If there is going to be any new hope, positive growth, or creative transformation, we will have to die to some old ways, conventional patterns, or secular wisdom, and embrace the kingdom of godly values that Jesus proclaimed. That means something different for each of us in various situations. But a cross, symbolically speaking, is a prelude to new life, an alternative vision to a new personal and social order. Still, we continue to resist that revelation. We do. We continue to resist it. We naturally prefer our faith to caress all the time. So we're selective with our Jesus, and we accept those things about him that make us comfortable. We tend to look for a religion that ignores the kingdom movement and takes its cue for the good life from our consumer society, which has increasingly become a plutocratic corporate kleptocracy. How's that for a mouthful? Plutocratic, we're governed by the rich. Corporate, a handful of major decisions are made by a few people in corporate boardrooms. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. Kleptocracy. And they steal from the people without us even knowing it. A corporate kleptocracy. And that in turn keeps leading us into shallow waters where we are easily conned into voting against our self-interests, bored, divided from each other, constantly operating out of fear and the paranoid style rather than generosity, especially in our politics, and it is bleeding us to death. It is bleeding us to death. But let me tell you some good news. That doesn't have to be. Why? Because we always have the opportunity to take our cue from Jesus. But remember, he was perfectly candid with those who chose to do so. Deny yourself, take up the cross, and follow me. That doesn't mean to put yourself down. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean putting yourself down. It means focusing more regularly on Jesus' style in ministry as it emerges from the Gospels. This Jesus who stood in line with the great prophets of Israel and like them proclaimed the ways of God. So I say again, to myself and to you, this Jesus we praise is not just a caress, but a challenge. I know his message strikes the ear of our secular world with all the force of a hint. With all the force of a hint. Some get that message. Some get that message. And many don't. But for those who do, it is the power of God unto salvation. Amen. Our most caring God, enable us to carry out from this place peace and strength to effectively deal with our troubled souls, our restless nation, our divided and pain-filled world. Because we have worshiped here, may we be able to work more patiently for those kinds of relationships in our individual lives and in our corporate lives that you will us to have. Amen.